I'm a 26-year-old woman, and like a lot of people my age, I'm still living at home. The job market isn't great, and rent prices are even worse, so staying with my parents has been my only real option for now. On the surface, things are fine. My parents and I get along well enough, but there's this undercurrent to our relationship that I can't ignore. They're the type of people who think they know what's best for me, always. Sometimes it's harmless advice about budgeting or career choices. Other times, it feels like they want to control every aspect of my life. One thing I've always been proud of is my hair. It's natural, unprocessed, and something I've spent years taking care of. I've never dyed it or done anything drastic because I like it the way it is. It's part of my identity, and maintaining it has always been a big deal for me. My friends often joke about how protective I am of it, but I just see it as self-care. Over the past few months, though, I started noticing small, strange things. At first, it was my pillowcases. They'd have weird stains on them that didn't make sense. I thought maybe I was sweating in my sleep or something, but it didn't look like regular sweat marks. Then there was this odd tingling on my scalp some mornings, like I'd used a product that didn't agree with me, but I hadn't changed anything in my routine. The lighting in my room can be tricky, so when my hair started looking a little different, almost like it was lighter in certain spots, I figured it was just the way the light hit it. But then my friends started asking questions. Did you dye your hair? It looks different, kind of shinier. I laughed it off because I knew I hadn't touched it. I chalked it up to paranoia or just them imagining things. Still, their comments stuck with me. The more I thought about it, the more I noticed other strange things. My shampoo smelled different, like it wasn't the brand I'd been using for years. The bristles on my hairbrush had this faint discoloration, which was new. And then there were the comments my parents would make. Little things like, change can be good, or you'd look amazing with just a bit of color. I brought it up one night, half joking. I asked them if they'd been sneaking into my room and doing something to my hair while I was asleep. It was meant to be funny, a way to tease them for their constant meddling. They laughed it off, but the way they acted afterward was strange. My mom quickly changed the subject, and my dad suddenly needed to check something in the kitchen. It was such an over-the-top reaction that it left me wondering if I'd hit on something real. That's when I decided to start paying attention. I set up my old phone as a makeshift security camera, hiding it in a pile of books on my nightstand. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do in my own home, but I needed answers. For a few nights, nothing happened. I started to think I was being ridiculous and that I'd wasted my time. Then, on the fourth night, I finally saw it. Watching the footage the next morning felt like a punch to the gut. My parents, both of them, had come into my room while I was dead asleep. My mom was holding a bowl of something, and my dad had gloves on. They were dyeing my hair, carefully, methodically, like it was some kind of project they were proud of. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't just a one-time thing either. From the way they moved, this was routine for them. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted to be absolutely sure before confronting them, so I started digging around. I went through the cabinets in their bathroom and found a stash of hair dye bottles and conditioners labeled for color-treated hair. The shades matched the slight changes I'd noticed in my hair. Then there were the receipts. I found a few crumpled up in the trash with dates going back months. They'd been doing this for a while. The betrayal I felt was unreal, but I couldn't just storm into the living room and start yelling. My parents were the type to deny, deflect, and turn the blame back on me if I wasn't careful. I needed a plan. Their anniversary dinner was coming up in 2 weeks, and they were planning a big event with family and friends. That gave me just enough time to figure out how to make my point, loud and clear. For now, I kept my distance, acting like everything was normal. It was hard to sit at the dinner table with them, pretending I didn't know what they'd been doing to me while I was asleep. Every time they smiled or made a casual comment about how healthy my hair looked, I felt my anger bubbling under the surface. But I kept quiet. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Update 1. Hair again. I asked my parents if they'd noticed any changes. Maybe it was lighter or shinier than before. My mom barely glanced up from her tablet and shrugged, while my dad muttered something vague about how I should be happy my hair looked healthy. Their reactions were dismissive, but there was a stiffness in how they carried on with the conversation. My mom started flipping through TV channels with more focus than usual, and my dad suddenly had something to do in the garage. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm they knew exactly what I was talking about. That night, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I waited until we were all seated at the dinner table, and I brought it up again, this time more directly. I asked them if they were doing anything to my hair without telling me. My mom gave a tight laugh, and my dad told me I was being ridiculous. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed them the footage. The silence in the room was deafening as the video played. My mom's face went pale, and my dad just sat there staring at the screen. They couldn't deny it anymore. When they finally spoke, their justification made my jaw drop. My mom started saying that my natural hair lacked vibrancy and that they'd only wanted to help me look better. My dad chimed in, saying that presentation matters, and they thought I'd thank them someday for giving me a polished look. They said they'd been worried that my natural hair made me look unprofessional, and that people wouldn't take me seriously. It was like listening to someone explain why they thought breaking into your house was a favor. I couldn't believe they actually thought this was okay. The argument escalated quickly. I demanded to know why they hadn't just talked to me if they felt that way. My mom said she knew I'd never agree, and that she thought I'd be too stubborn to understand their perspective. My dad tried to play the victim, saying they'd only done it because they cared about me and wanted the best for me. They weren't apologizing, they were doubling down. When I pointed out how invasive and controlling their actions were, they brushed it off as if I was overreacting. It felt like I was talking to strangers. I thought about calling in reinforcements. My younger brother lives a couple of hours away, so I called him the next day and told him everything. His response? That's weird, but they probably didn't mean any harm. Maybe just let it go. A close family friend I confided in said something similar, telling me to pick my battles and not blow things out of proportion. It was like no one understood how serious this felt to me. I wasn't just upset about the dye, I was furious about the lack of respect and the betrayal of trust. Feeling cornered, I turned to my friends. They were horrified when I told them what was going on. One of them even joked that I should shave my head as a way to reclaim my autonomy. At first I laughed it off, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My parents had gone behind my back to change something deeply personal about me. So what better way to make a statement than to take control of my appearance in the most dramatic way possible? It wasn't just about revenge, it was about sending a message. I started planning. Their anniversary dinner was in a week, and it was the perfect opportunity. They'd invited extended family and a few close friends, and they were treating it like a big celebration. I ordered an electric razor online and practiced with it to make sure I could use it confidently. I decided that during the dinner, when everyone was toasting to them, I'd stand up and shave my head in front of everyone. It would be a bold, unapologetic move that no one could ignore. My friends supported me, but warned me about the fallout. They reminded me that the family would probably take sides and that things could get messy. I didn't care. At this point, I was beyond worrying about who would think what. My parents had taken something from me without my permission, and it was time to take it back. In the days leading up to the dinner, I kept a low profile at home. My parents were busy finalizing details for the event, blissfully unaware of what I had planned. They made small talk about decorations and the guest list, completely oblivious to the fact that I was about to turn their big night into a reckoning. Every time they smiled at me or complimented my hair, it only fueled my resolve. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what they'd done. Update 2. The anniversary dinner was as grand as my parents had been planning for weeks. I dressed up, making sure I looked as polished as they'd always wanted me to. My hair, the very thing they'd tampered with, was styled neatly, ironic, considering what was about to happen. When I arrived at the venue, it was clear my parents were in their element. They greeted guests with bright smiles, talking about their decades of marriage and the strong family they'd built. I smiled back at them, keeping my demeanor calm and pleasant. No one suspected anything. The venue was buzzing with laughter and conversations. Extended family and a few of my parents' close friends filled the room. The decorations were elaborate, the food smelled amazing, and everyone seemed genuinely happy to celebrate. My parents looked thrilled to be surrounded by so many people, making comments about how proud they were of me and how I'd grown into such a beautiful woman. I nodded politely, biting my tongue. They had no idea the storm brewing under my surface. I watched them soak up the compliments from guests, talking about family values and respect, which only fueled my determination to follow through. When it was time for the toasts, my dad stood up first, giving a heartfelt speech about the ups and downs of their marriage. My mom followed with a sweet reflection on the love and support they'd given each other over the years. The room applauded, glasses clinked, and the mood was as celebratory as they'd hoped. Then, they gestured for me to give a toast, clearly expecting something glowing and appreciative. I stood up, holding my glass, and looked around the room. I started off light, talking about how much I respected their dedication to each other and their commitment to the family. People smiled, and my parents beamed with pride. Then I shifted the tone. I brought up the importance of trust and how it's a cornerstone of any relationship, whether it's a marriage, a friendship, or a parent-child bond. The smiles around the room began to fade slightly, and my parents exchanged quick glances. That's when I set my glass down and pulled the electric razor from my bag. The first buzz of the razor filled the silent room as I brought it to my head and began shaving off my hair. Gasps erupted from every corner of the venue. My mom stood frozen, her hand halfway to her mouth, while my dad's expression turned from confusion to horror. I kept shaving, letting clumps of hair fall to the floor, while the room buzzed with murmurs and whispers. Some relatives looked completely shocked, while others whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. As I shaved, I explained to everyone in the room what had been going on. I told them how my parents had been sneaking into my room while I slept, dyeing my hair without my consent for months. I described how they'd justified it, saying my natural hair wasn't good enough, and that they were trying to help me look better. I pulled out my phone and showed the video footage to a few nearby relatives, who passed it around in disbelief. The murmurs grew louder, and a few people began calling out my parents, asking if it was true. My parents tried to stop me. My mom came forward, her voice trembling as she begged me to stop making a scene. My dad tried to explain it away, saying they'd only wanted what was best for me. But I didn't stop. I showed the receipts I'd found, the hair dye bottles I'd uncovered in their bathroom, and explained how long this had been going on. The room was split. Some relatives looked horrified and started questioning my parents, while others whispered that I was being dramatic and ruining their big night. The chaos only escalated. My mom tried to regain control, saying this wasn't the time or place for such accusations, but it was too late. Relatives started arguing amongst themselves, some defending me and saying my parents had crossed a line, while others accused me of overreacting and disrespecting them. My parents stood there, caught between trying to save face and addressing the growing outrage from family members. The carefully curated celebration they planned had turned into a disaster. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I grabbed my bag, thanked a few supportive relatives, and left with a couple of friends who had come for moral support. As I walked out, I could still hear the arguments echoing from inside the venue. My phone buzzed with notifications almost immediately. Some family members had already started posting about what happened, and within hours, the story was spreading through the extended family group chats. Opinions were divided, with some relatives texting me in support and others condemning me for what they called a public humiliation. The next day, my phone was flooded with calls and messages from my parents. They alternated between furious rants and tearful apologies, but I didn't respond. I needed space, so I blocked their numbers temporarily. A few relatives reached out to mediate, but I wasn't ready to engage. The lines had been drawn, and the family was clearly divided. Some supported me, saying I had every right to stand up for myself, while others accused me of being petty and immature. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my life again. The fallout was overwhelming, but I didn't regret my decision. My parents had taken my autonomy from me, and I'd made sure they couldn't do it again. The price of my peace was high, but it was worth it. Update 3. After the anniversary dinner fiasco, I decided to go no contact with my parents. I packed a few bags and moved in with a friend who offered me their spare room. It wasn't ideal, I missed having my own space, but being away from my parents felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a while, I wasn't constantly on edge, wondering what they'd do or say next. My parents tried reaching out through texts and calls, but I ignored them. Eventually, they sent me a long letter. The letter was a mix of justification and deflection. They claimed they'd acted out of love and concern, insisting they only wanted to help me reach my potential. They said they'd never intended to hurt me and were devastated by how I'd handled things at the dinner. Nowhere in the letter was an actual apology for what they did. Instead, it read like an attempt to shift the blame onto me, accusing me of being ungrateful and making the family look bad. I didn't respond. At that point, I wasn't interested in hearing any more excuses. Meanwhile, the family fallout from the dinner was in full swing. Extended family members started calling and messaging me, each with their own opinion. Some supported me, saying my parents had crossed a serious line. Others thought I'd gone too far by making the issue public. A few even suggested I apologize to my parents for ruining their big night. It was exhausting trying to explain myself over and over, so I eventually stopped responding to anyone who wasn't supportive. Let them talk. I had bigger things to focus on. One of my closest friends suggested starting a small fundraiser to help me move out permanently. At first, I was hesitant. Asking for financial help felt awkward, but my friend pointed out that people might want to support me if they knew the story. We set up a page explaining what had happened, and to my surprise, the response was overwhelming. Friends, coworkers, and even a few extended family members contributed, leaving kind messages of encouragement. Within a few weeks, I had enough money to afford a small apartment. Finding my own place was a turning point. It was nothing fancy, a tiny one-bedroom with creaky floors and outdated appliances, but it was mine. I furnished it with secondhand items and DIY projects, slowly making it feel like home. My parents found out through the grapevine and showed up unannounced one afternoon. I didn't let them in. They stood outside, alternating between apologizing and scolding me for cutting them out of my life. I told them through the door that I wasn't ready to talk and asked them to leave. They eventually did, but not without a few dramatic parting comments about how families should stick together. Family events became a minefield after that. Some relatives refused to invite me, siding with my parents and accusing me of being disrespectful. Others avoided the topic altogether, pretending nothing had happened. The few who supported me made an effort to check in, but the tension was unavoidable. Gossip spread through the family like wildfire, and I quickly became the black sheep in some circles. I didn't care. I was too busy reclaiming my life. With my shaved head, I felt like a new person. It was a bold look, and I decided to lean into it. I experimented with scarves, hats, and even temporary hair colors as it grew back. What started as an act of rebellion became a symbol of my freedom. For the first time, I could decide how I wanted to present myself without anyone else's influence. It was empowering in a way I hadn't expected. Over the next few months, my parents' tone softened. The angry texts and accusatory letters stopped, replaced by messages that sounded more apologetic. They admitted they'd overstepped and said they wanted to rebuild the relationship. I wasn't sure how to respond. Forgiveness sounded good in theory, but the trust was gone. Every time I thought about letting them back into my life, I remembered the months of deception and how they'd violated my boundaries. It wasn't an easy decision. In the meantime, things started looking up for me. I found a new job with better pay and hours, which gave me more financial stability. My friends became my chosen family, supporting me in ways I never expected. We started weekly dinners at my apartment, where we'd cook together and laugh about ridiculous things. They made me realize that family doesn't have to mean blood. It's about the people who show up for you. Looking back, I realized how much I'd grown through the ordeal. Losing trust in my parents was one of the hardest things I'd ever experienced, but it forced me to stand on my own 2 feet. I'd spent so much of my life trying to meet their expectations, and now, for the first time, I was figuring out what I wanted for myself. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Update 4. After months of no contact, I received a letter from my parents. This time it felt different. It wasn't defensive or full of justifications like their earlier attempts. They acknowledged their actions, admitted they had been wrong, and apologized for violating my trust. They wrote that they missed me and wanted to rebuild the relationship, promising they'd respect my boundaries moving forward. The tone of the letter was sincere enough that I decided to give them a chance, but only under strict conditions. I agreed to meet them in a neutral, public place, a small cafe not far from my apartment. It was awkward at first. My parents looked like they didn't know where to start, so I let them take their time. They apologized again, this time face-to-face, and admitted they hadn't considered how much their actions would hurt me. They assured me they'd never interfere in my life like that again, and asked if we could work toward repairing our relationship. I listened, keeping my guard up but appreciating the effort they were making. I told them that rebuilding trust would take time, and that there would be boundaries they couldn't cross. We began communicating cautiously after that. I agreed to occasional phone calls and short visits but made it clear I wouldn't tolerate any attempts to control or criticize my choices. They seemed to understand, although there were moments when their old habits tried to resurface. For instance, my mom once suggested I grow my hair out and try a more professional look now that I was working a better job. I reminded her that my appearance was my choice, and to her credit, she backed off without a fight. Family gatherings were still tense. Some relatives who had sided with my parents avoided me altogether, while others tried to play peacemaker, urging me to let it go for the sake of harmony. My parents and I kept our interactions minimal at these events, sticking to polite conversation and avoiding sensitive topics. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the outright hostility from before. One thing that frustrated me was their attempt to compensate with gifts. They started sending me small items, home decor, clothes, even a high-end hair care set. It felt like they were trying to buy back my forgiveness, which didn't sit well with me. I thanked them but politely declined most of the gifts, reiterating that actions mattered more than things. They seemed disappointed but respected my decision. Despite the ups and downs, I could tell they were making an effort. My dad started asking more about my work and showed genuine interest in my projects. My mom occasionally texted to share a recipe or ask how I was doing, keeping things light and friendly. It was a far cry from the overbearing behavior I'd grown used to. And while I still had my reservations, I appreciated the change. During this time, I found ways to process everything that had happened. I started journaling as a way to untangle my thoughts and emotions. Writing it all down helped me make sense of the betrayal, the fallout, and the slow steps toward reconciliation. It also gave me a space to reflect on my own growth. I realized how much stronger and more independent I'd become since moving out. I also picked up a new hobby, painting. It started as a casual project to fill my evenings but quickly became something I looked forward to. I experimented with abstract art and bold colors, channeling my emotions into every piece. It wasn't about being good at it, it was about expressing myself in a way I hadn't before. My friends loved my work and encouraged me to keep going, even suggesting I display my pieces at local art fairs. Over time, my parents began to make small, meaningful gestures. They sent me handwritten notes on my birthday and kept their messages short and respectful during holidays. When I visited, they avoided making comments about my appearance or lifestyle. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments where I could see them struggling to fully accept my independence, but they were trying, and that mattered. I allowed these small steps but stayed wary of old patterns repeating themselves. I made it clear that any breach of trust would set us back to square one. They seemed to understand, and the relationship slowly settled into a civil, distant dynamic. We weren't as close as we'd been before the incident, but we weren't at war anymore, either. As I looked back on everything, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I was glad to have my life back on track and to feel like my own person again, but I couldn't help wishing things had been different. If my parents had respected my boundaries from the start, none of this would have happened. Still, I knew I couldn't change the past. All I could do was move forward. My friends reminded me to keep standing my ground, and I took their advice to heart. The new boundaries I'd set weren't just for my parents, they were for me. They were a reminder that my autonomy was worth protecting, no matter what. Update 5. The months after reconnecting with my parents were surprisingly calm. The boundaries I'd set earlier held firm, and they seemed to genuinely respect them. There were no sudden visits, no unsolicited advice about my appearance or lifestyle, and no guilt-tripping texts. It felt like they'd finally understood that my autonomy wasn't up for negotiation. They still expressed regret for what they'd done, but it was in small, quiet ways rather than grand gestures. I noticed the change, and while the damage wasn't entirely undone, it was a step forward. The extended family drama, which had been a constant buzz for so long, began to die down. The relatives who had taken my parents' side seemed to lose interest once they realized I wasn't engaging. At family events, the tension slowly eased. My parents kept their distance unless I approached them, and even the relatives who had been the most vocal about my overreaction stopped bringing it up. It was like everyone collectively decided to move on, and I was happy to let them. In my personal life, I continued to explore my identity. My shaved head, which had started as an act of defiance, became a canvas for creativity. As it grew back, I experimented with bold colors, bright reds, purples, and even electric blue. It was something I'd always wanted to try but had hesitated because of my parents' opinions. Now I didn't have to think twice. My friends loved it and encouraged me to keep experimenting, and I felt more confident in my appearance than ever before. Reconnecting with the relatives who had supported me during the fallout was another bright spot. A few of them reached out, inviting me to coffee or small gatherings, where we caught up and talked about everything but the drama. It was refreshing to have family who genuinely cared about me without trying to dictate my life. Those connections became stronger over time, and I realized I didn't need the approval of everyone in my family, just the ones who truly respected me. My friends, who had been my rock through the entire ordeal, remained my chosen family. We celebrated my milestones together, like when I landed a promotion at work or finished my first painting commission. They were there for the little things too, helping me pick out new furniture for my apartment or joining me for spontaneous movie nights. Their unwavering support reminded me that I wasn't alone, even when things felt difficult. Career-wise, things were going better than ever. The new job I'd taken after moving out gave me the stability I'd been craving. I threw myself into my work, taking on new challenges and proving myself to my team. The confidence I'd gained from reclaiming my independence translated into my professional life, and it wasn't long before my efforts were recognized. I started receiving more responsibilities, and my manager even hinted at a potential leadership role in the future. My relationship with my parents continued to improve, slowly but steadily. They stopped trying to push their ideas of what my life should look like and instead started showing interest in the choices I was making. My mom even complimented one of my bold hair colors during a holiday dinner, which I took as a small but meaningful gesture. My dad, who had always been more reserved, began asking about my painting hobby and offered to help me set up a small studio space in my apartment. These little changes made me feel like they were genuinely trying to meet me halfway. Despite the progress, I remained cautious. I made it clear that while I was willing to rebuild our relationship, I wouldn't tolerate any repeat behavior. They respected that, and over time, our interactions settled into a civil, manageable dynamic. It wasn't the close-knit bond we'd had before, but it was healthier and more balanced. Looking back, I can see how much I've grown since everything happened. The ordeal taught me the importance of standing up for myself and setting boundaries, even when it's uncomfortable. It also showed me who I could truly rely on, friends who became family and family members who chose to support me unconditionally. I realized that while the experience had been painful, it had also made me stronger and more self-assured. These days, I share the story of what happened with new friends as a funny but poignant anecdote. They're usually shocked when they hear about my parents dyeing my hair without my consent, but we laugh about the anniversary dinner showdown. It's become a reminder of how far I've come and how much I've gained by reclaiming my autonomy. As I move forward, I'm focused on building the life I want, one where my choices are mine alone. My career is thriving, my relationships are solid, and my confidence has never been higher. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Reclaiming my independence and my identity was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the most empowering. In the end, every struggle and every moment of uncertainty led me to where I am now, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.